I think that Shedeur Sanders has the potential to be a top 10 quarterback in the league. I'm not saying it's going to happen. And when I say potential to be a top 10 quarterback, I'm more so looking at a guy who's in that 8 to 10 range at max. Unless my eyes don't work, why in the world is Shedeur Sanders not the starting quarterback on the Cleveland Browns? I get it. Joe Flacco was able to win some games for them 2 years ago. But at the same time, what happened when they got to the playoffs? They got absolutely demolished in that game. Dillon Gabriel is not a better quarterback than Shedeur Sanders. Because what my eyes told me last year when I watched both of these guys play is that Shedeur Sanders is clearly a better quarterback than Dillon Gabriel. Yes, Dillon Gabriel can operate an offense. Now, this is on the college level. He was able to operate an offense. He was able to get his playmakers the ball. I actually think that Shedeur Sanders did more than just operate the offense at Colorado. I think that he did a really good job of elevating that offense at Colorado. It wasn't a very good team. It wasn't a very good program before Shedeur Sanders came to that program, and I think really turned it around alongside Deion Sanders and Travis Hunter. I just think that he is the best quarterback on this team. I think that he has the highest ceiling out of all the quarterbacks on this team. When you talk about Joe Flacco, Dillon Gabriel, Kenny Pickett, none of these guys are desirable quarterbacks. Dillon Gabriel in the third round, that was just a flat out reach. But I think that Shedeur Sanders has the potential to be a top 10 quarterback in the league. I'm not saying it's going to happen. And when I say potential to be a top 10 quarterback, I'm more so looking at a guy who's in that 8 to 10 range at max, right? I had a second round grade on him coming out of Colorado. There were people that believed that this guy was the next Joe Burrow. I mean, like, those people aren't to be taken seriously in football conversations, people who thought that. But what I think Jared Goff is, he's a guy like Teddy Bridgewater, like Jared Goff, who he can operate an offense. He can do all of the things that you ask him to do. He can get your playmakers to football. I think that he can do that on the NFL level. I think he has a pretty good arm. I think that he could do all the things that you ask a quarterback to do on the NFL level. Now, do I think he can be a guy who could be a difference maker for a team? Absolutely not. But they drafted him in the 5th round, right? Like, if you drafted Jared Goff in the 5th round, to me, I'd be ecstatic about that, because most 5th round quarterbacks don't turn out to be anything, let alone a legitimate starter in the league for a team that, you know, makes the playoffs year in and year out, right? So if Shedeur Sanders can be that, I personally believe that a 5th round pick for that, I mean, absolutely. But I just wonder, when it comes to this front office and coaching staff, did they actually want Shedeur Sanders, or was this something that was pushed onto them by ownership? Because, to be honest with you, when they drafted him, it's not like they looked very excited when they drafted him. I mean, you're talking about a guy who media scouts had as a top 3 pick in the NFL draft. Now, I do get that there is a divide between media scouts and team scouts, but I don't think that the divide between, you know, the media scouts and the national scouts is that drastic to where media scouts had him in the 1st round. NFL scouts, you know, they didn't pick him until the 5th round. I don't think that the difference between that is that drastic. He's probably, in reality, a 2nd or 3rd round talent that I think actually he landed in a great position with the Cleveland Browns and Kevin Stefanski. I think he could be very successful in that offense. I just don't think that that is an organization that is really embracing Shedeur Sanders. Now, to be honest with you, I do grow tired of seeing all these people on ESPN and FS1 talk about how wrong the Cleveland Browns are doing Shedeur Sanders. Like, Shedeur Sanders did this to himself as well. I mean, that was one of the worst pre-draft processes of all time. Like, if he had a good pre-draft process, he would have been probably the Giants quarterback right now. They probably would have drafted him in the 1st round if he would have had a better pre-draft process than he had this past offseason, right? I mean, there's a case that maybe the Cleveland Browns would have drafted him at pick number 2 if he would have had a better pre-draft process. Because at every turn, Shedeur Sanders made himself look as unappealing as possible to NFL teams, not taking meetings with certain teams and, trying to act like he was better than the teams that he interviewed with. I mean, you heard stories about him at the combine, brushing off certain installs when it came to the New York Giants when they were asking him certain questions, and he kind of just brushed it off when he was asked difficult questions. I mean, you heard these stories. You heard all the things that Todd McShay was telling his audience about, Shedeur Sanders' combine interview. So while the Browns, yes, I don't think are embracing Shedeur Sanders and the fact that they were able to get, I think, a second-round talent in the 5th round, Shedeur Sanders did do a lot of this to himself, and he got a speeding ticket this offseason. Like, he's got to know better than that. He's got to know that the spotlight is on him. He's going to be one of these quarterbacks that, just like Caleb Williams, just like Dak Prescott, just like Kirk Cousins, just like some of these other quarterbacks out there, they're going to pay attention to what you don't do and the bad that you do instead of the good that you do. There are quarterbacks in this league that for some reason, it doesn't matter how poorly they play. People will always look at the good that they do compared to the bad. Guys like Justin Herbert, guys like Jordan Love. People will look at the good that they do instead of the bad. Now, I do like, by the way, for the Herbert heads out there, I'm a big Justin Herbert fan, but let's call it what it is. There are a lot of his fans out there that completely ignore all the bad things that he'll do over the course of a season, right? I think that Shedeur Sanders is unfortunately going to be one of those guys to where he can be a guy that puts up 30 plus touchdowns and 4,000 yards, but people are going to recognize only the bad and not talk about the good with this guy. And I think he's really going to put himself in that spotlight. And I think that that's unfortunate. But again, there is an element of we have to hold Shedeur Sanders accountable in this instance. Shedeur Sanders did not make himself appealing to the national audience, and he didn't make himself appealing to NFL teams. And, I do think that some of the Shedeur Sanders praise that we saw last season where people were talking about him as a top 3 pick was like really forced. And I do think people are trying to force certain narratives on Shedeur Sanders, like, hey, he's the most pro-ready quarterback since Joe Burrow, or maybe since Andrew Luck. I think I saw a tweet like that. Completely forced. That analysis is not to be taken seriously. Mel Kiper saying that he's a combination of Tom Brady and Joe Burrow, not to be taken seriously. People saying that, I heard Stephen A. Smith, if the Cowboys had the number 1 overall pick, they'd pick Shedeur Sanders. Well, they didn't even pick the guy in the 3rd round when they had the opportunity to pick him. Again, all of these narratives completely forced. But I do think that there are narratives being forced right now on the opposite side where I don't think people are giving this young man a chance. And I do think that if Kevin Stefanski coaches him up and some of the flaws that he has in his game when it comes to drifting in the pocket and holding on to the ball for too long and taking bad sacks, those things can be coached out of a player. And I think if you're able to coach some of those deficiencies out of his game and get him within structure and get him on a good path, I think that you'll have a guy that could be a legitimate starting quarterback in the league.